Imagine you are walking into a world-class art museum. Picture the Louvre in Paris, or maybe the Musée d'Orsay.
Oh, yeah, the really grand ones.
Exactly. And you step onto those, those highly polished, echoing hardwood floors. The air around you is perfectly climate controlled. It has that faint, distinct museum smell.
Like old varnish and dustless space.
Right, exactly. And you look down a long gallery and you see these massive gilded frames hanging on the walls. They're holding these masterpieces that have defined human culture for over a century.
And this is the crucial part in this scenario. You're not there to appreciate the brushstrokes.
No, you're not. You're not there to read the little curatorial plaques about 19th century France. You are walking into that gallery to receive a highly calibrated clinical neurological reset.
Yeah, you are stepping out of the role of a tourist or an art critic, and you are stepping into the role of a patient. The gallery itself has basically been transformed into a biomechanical clinic.
And the treatments are the paintings themselves. Like, you look at one specific canvas, a landscape maybe, and your heart rate physically drops by 10 beats per minute.
Yeah, or you shift your gaze to a cityscape across the room, and the spinal posture of your upper back automatically aligns.
Releasing all that tension in your neck, It sounds incredibly futuristic. I mean, it borders on science fiction. But it is the very real, very grounded core of a concept called visual biohacking.
Which is such a fascinating term.
It really is. And that is the mission of our deep dive today. We are exploring this groundbreaking protocol presented by Dr. Christophe Delong and an organization called Conexa Formation.
We have this massive stack of source documents in front of us, and they fuse 19th century Impressionist art with cutting-edge artificial intelligence, clinical neuroscience, and human biomechanics.
The synthesis they have achieved here is just staggering.
It really is. To understand what Dr. Christophe Delong and Conexa Formation are presenting, we have to look at their core operating thesis. Because they're utilizing artificial intelligence to measure the fluidity, the efficiency, and, well, the degradation of human movement.
Right.
But they are capturing this data entirely through the prism of Impressionist art. So they've taken the intuitive, almost subconscious brilliance of painters like Claude Monet, Edgar Degas, Gustave Caillebotte.
The absolute masters.
Exactly. And they are translating that aesthetic, emotional beauty into objective, quantifiable, actionable clinical data. And they use this data for deep physical and cognitive rehabilitation.
Let's pause right there, actually. Because if you are listening to this on your commute, or maybe you're walking the dog or sitting hunched over your laptop right now, you might be thinking, well, I'm not an art historian.
Right.
I'm certainly not an elite athlete going through physical rehab. So how does this apply to me?
How it applies to everyone.
Deeply, fundamentally. What we are going to explore today offers incredibly practical, mechanical insights into how your specific brain and your specific body process visual stimuli every single second of the day.
Because the modern environment is, quite frankly, relentlessly hostile to our primitive nervous systems.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
We're going to look at the mechanics of how you manage physical effort when you pick up a heavy box, how the architecture of your office dictates how you sit.
Oh, the architectural exoskeleton. That part is amazing.
Right, how you navigate walking down a crowded street, and most importantly, how your nervous system either succeeds or fails at recovering from the absolute sensory bombardment of the modern world.
We are subjected to a constant barrage of artificial light, digital noise, and architectural constraints. What Conexa Formation presents is an applied biological methodology for surviving and actually optimizing within that hostile environment.
So if we examine the underlying philosophy of the source material, the Conexa approach is singular. They treat the viewing of art as a prescribed therapeutic protocol.
Yeah, the program is deliberately structured around 5 specific Impressionist masters.
And each artist was chosen for a very specific medical reason, right?
Exactly, because their specific style of painting triggers a completely unique dimension of human movement or spatial perception or parasympathetic recovery.
The way they deconstruct these paintings is entirely novel. I mean, it's the equivalent of looking at a famous Monet, like the soft blending colors of a water lily pond, and realizing that you're actually staring at a highly advanced piece of medical software.
That has just been cleverly disguised as oil paint.
Exactly. They've essentially reverse engineered the masterpiece. But before we get into the specific artists, we really need to clarify the technology here. Because how does looking at a piece of canvas translate into a clinical metric?
That's a big question.
Right. If the painting is the input And my nervous system is the processor. How does Connexa's AI actually capture the output? I mean, are they using complex biometric suits or, I don't know, retinal implants?
No, it's much more elegant than that, and entirely non-invasive. Conexa is utilizing advanced computer vision and pose estimation algorithms.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so when a person stands in front of one of these specific paintings, the image acts as a visual trigger. It induces a very specific physiological state, and as the person's body reacts to that visual input, involuntarily standard optical sensors, just cameras feed high frame rate video into Connex's AI.
Okay, so just cameras mapping the body.
Right. The AI maps a highly detailed digital skeleton over the person's body in real time. It is tracking micro movements that the human eye simply cannot perceive.
So it's looking at the geometry of my posture while I'm distracted by the art.
It is looking at the geometry of your posture, the microscopic shifts in your center of gravity, the minute changes in your resting muscle tension, and the precise tracking of your gaze.
Wait, it tracks eye movements too.
Oh, absolutely. The AI can measure microsaccades. Those are the tiny, rapid movements of your eyes to determine your cognitive load. So if a specific painting is designed to lower your heart rate and activate spatial awareness, the AI isn't just asking if you feel relaxed.
Yeah, it's not a survey.
No, it is measuring the exact millimeter drop in your shoulders, the slowing of your respiratory expansion, and the stabilization of your axial skeleton to quantify exactly how well your nervous system executed that physiological shift.
That bridges the gap perfectly. I mean, the art provides the stimulus, the body reacts involuntarily, and the AI maps the geometry of that reaction.
Precisely.
Okay, with that foundation set, let's step into the actual chronological sequence of what Connexa has built. The source material outlines a 15-day progressive journey, and it mirrors the logical evolution of the human body's experience throughout day.
Yes, starting with how we wake up.
Right. Phase I, l'éveil de la perception, the awakening and calibration. This is all about how the human brain first boots up and orients itself in physical space.
The protocol begins with what they term the genesis of the signal. And to trigger this initial state, Connexa utilizes Claude Monet's iconic painting, Impression Sunrise.
Oh, I know that one. That's the painting that actually gave the Impressionist movement its name.
It is. It depicts the harbor of Le Havre in France at dawn. The sun is this distinct orange orb, but everything else, the boats, the water, the industrial background, is rendered in loose, hazy, undefined brushstrokes of blue and gray.
It looks completely blurry. I mean, if you look at it closely, there are no sharp edges at all. It feels like you're looking at the world through squinted eyes.
Which is precisely why Connexa uses it to map the neurology of waking up. Waking from sleep is not a simple binary switch. Your brain doesn't just suddenly turn the lights on.
Right. It's not like flipping a switch on the wall.
No. When you first open your eyes in the morning, your visual cortex does not instantly render a high-definition, sharply focused picture of your bedroom ceiling. The brain actually has to process the raw data in stages.
Yeah, I always notice that groggy, sort of disorienting face for the first few seconds after the alarm goes off. You see the light from the window and maybe the dark shape of the doorway, but it takes a moment for your brain to attach labels to those shapes.
Exactly. During those first few seconds, your brain is primarily processing luminous gradients, shifting patterns of light and dark. This raw visual data hits the retina and travels first to a structure deep in the midbrain. It's called the superior colliculus.
The superior colliculus.
Yes. It's a primitive, highly rapid sensory processor. Doesn't care what an object is. It only cares where the light is coming from and if it is moving.
Oh, so it's a threat detection thing.
Essentially, yes. It acts as an early warning radar system. It sends immediate signals to the muscles of your neck and your eyes to orient your head toward the light source, long before the slower, more complex visual cortex at the back of your brain has time to render the sharp contours of the room.
So the superior colliculus points the camera, and then the visual cortex develops the film.
That's a very apt mechanical analogy. The brain is essentially sampling the luminous reality. It's reconstructing the environment piece by piece before it finally stabilizes the image into sharp focus.
Wow.
And Dr. Delong and Connexa point out that Monet's intentional hazy blur in Impression, Sunrise, is not just an artistic choice. It is a perfect biomimicry of this exact neurological process.
So Monet literally painted the way the human midbrain sees the world before the visual cortex finishes rendering the edges.
Yes. And by having a patient observe this specific blur, Conexa uses the AI to measure the reactivity of that orienting response. They are testing the basic hardware of the visual system.
It's speaking the brain's native primitive language of light and shadow.
Okay.
Okay, so we have opened our eyes, the visual cortex is online. But the moment we sit up and get out of bed, we introduce a massive new variable, which is gravity.
The constant struggle.
Right. The visual signal is established, but now the physical body has to figure out how to stand upright on a rock spinning through space.
The negotiation with gravity is constant. And it brings us to the concept of dynamic equilibrium. Let's step away from the painting for a moment and look at the biomechanics of standing still.
Okay.
If you're standing in line at a coffee shop, you might feel like you are perfectly motionless. But you're not. You're essentially a tall, heavy tower balancing on a very small base of support your feet.
And if someone brushes past you or, a gust of wind hits you, you don't just tip over like a felled tree. Your body catches itself.
Right. And the mechanism behind that catch is a marvel of biological engineering. Deep inside your inner ear is the vestibular system. It's a complex labyrinth of fluid-filled canals.
Heard of that. When you get dizzy, that's what's messed up.
Exactly. When your head moves even a millimeter off-center, the fluid in those canals sloshes against microscopic hair cells. Those hair cells fire action potentials down the vestibular nerve to your brainstem and your cerebellum. The cerebellum instantly calculates the exact degree of your imbalance and fires counter signals down your spinal cord to your muscular chains, your calves, your core, your erector spinae.
So it's firing muscles to pull you back.
Yes. These muscles execute microscopic twitches, firing and relaxing in milliseconds, pulling your skeletal structure back to the center of gravity.
It's millions of background calculations happening every second just so I don't fall over while waiting for a latte.
It's incredible, and this is where the Conexa AI metric becomes critical, because they aren't putting people on a balance board to see if they fall off.
No, the AI is observing the person standing perfectly still in front of the art, and it's mapping those invisible postural micro-adjustments.
Exactly. It's calculating the speed and the symmetry of the muscular corrections. Conexa defines this specific metric as resilience.
Resilience.
Yes. In their clinical framework, resilience is not a psychological trait. It is a mechanical one. It's the quantifiable speed at which your nervous system and your musculature adapt to disequilibrium. A healthy nervous system corrects the imbalance instantly, with minimal energy loss. A degraded nervous system overcompensates, which leads to larger, more jagged physical sways.
That completely reframes the concept of balance. Dealing with imbalance isn't a failure of the system. The speed of your recovery from that imbalance is the true indicator of your neuromotor health.
Exactly.
And Conexa uses specific visual inputs to train this stability right. Because the source material highlights a shift from Monet's blurry sunrise to paintings of Paris rooftops covered in snow.
Yes, Christophe Delong.
Right. Caillebotte painted several of these looking out over the city, where the dominant visual features are the sharp vertical lines of the chimney stacks and the size of the buildings.
The transition from hazy light to sharp vertical structure is entirely deliberate here. When you look out over a cityscape defined by distinct vertical elements, it forces your visual system to organize space in depth. It actively engages your binocular vision.
Binocular vision being how our two eyes, which are spaced slightly apart, take two slightly different 2D images and stitch them together to calculate 3D depth and distance.
Correct. And vertical lines are the primary anchors for that depth calculation. When your gaze locks onto a stable vertical structure in the distance, it sends a powerful neurological signal of spatial certainty down through your entire central nervous system.
The brain says, I know exactly where that object is, therefore I know exactly where my body is in relation to it.
Exactly. This visual anchoring drastically reduces the computational load on your cerebellum, which in turn reduces the constant anxious firing of your postural muscles. The visual stability literally cascades down your spine. It physically relaxes your skeletal posture.
Think about how radical a concept that is for the modern listener.
Right.
We spend the vast majority of our waking hours doing the exact opposite of looking at deep, vertical structures.
We really do.
I mean, if you are listening to this, consider what your eyes have been doing for the last 4 hours. You have likely been staring at a flat, two-dimensional smartphone screen or a flat computer monitor located somewhere between 12 and 20 inches from your face.
The physiological cost of that modern habit is immense. When you stare at a screen that close to your face for prolonged periods, the ciliary muscles inside your eyes, the muscles that change the shape of your lens to maintain focus, they get locked in a state of continuous isometric contraction.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, your medial rectus muscles are pulling your eyes slightly inward to converge on that near point. It is the muscular equivalent of holding a heavy dumbbell at arm's length for 4 hours.
I can feel my eyes hurting just thinking about that.
Yeah, the oculomotor muscles are profoundly fatigued.
And because the body is a singular connected kinetic chain, that eye fatigue doesn't just stay in the eyes, does it?
No, it cannot stay in the eyes. The oculomotor nerve complex is deeply intertwined with the vestibular system and the upper cervical spine. When your visual system is strained and locked in a shallow depth of field, the brain actually perceives a mild, constant state of spatial disorientation.
So you're constantly a little bit lost neurologically?
Basically, yes. To compensate, the brain recruits the muscles of the neck and the upper shoulders, the suboccipital muscles, and the upper trapezius. It tightens them to stabilize the head. That chronic neck pain and shoulder tension so many office workers feel is often directly referred from the exhaustion of their eye muscles.
And so Conexa utilizes these deep, structured architectural paintings to break that cycle, to force the eyes to look into the distance and restore that depth of field.
Exactly.
And the source documents offer a very practical, actionable takeaway for you, the listener, right here, which is the 20-20-20 rule. Have you encountered this in clinical literature before?
Oh, yes. It's a standard piece of optometric advice. But its foundation rests entirely on the biomechanical principles we are discussing right now.
So for the listener, the rule is really simple. For every 20 minutes you spend locked onto a near-field screen, you must look at an object at least 20 feet away for a minimum of 20 seconds.
And that timing is critical. 20 seconds is the physiological minimum required for those deeply fatigued ciliary muscles in your eyes to fully release their contraction.
Right.
By focusing on a distant point, ideally a vertical structure out a window, you disengage the convergence of your eyes. You reestablish your binocular depth perception, and you send that signal of spatial certainty back down your spine.
If you perform this simple visual biohack, you will literally physically feel the tension begin to melt out of your neck and shoulder girdle.
It's a reset button for your posture.
Triggered entirely by your eyeball. Okay, so we have calibrated the visual cortex, we have established our balance against gravity, and we have anchored our posture using verticality. But a human being doesn't just stand still staring at rooftops.
No, we have to move.
Right, and usually we have to move through environments filled with other people. This brings us to a really fascinating tension in the protocol. Navigating noise versus finding visual silence.
To address the complexity of moving through a crowded environment, Conexa turns to the work of Camille Pissarro. Specifically, they utilize his paintings of the grand boulevards of Paris, like the Boulevard Montmartre.
Oh, those are beautiful.
They are. But what makes these paintings clinically relevant is the perspective. Pissarro didn't paint these street scenes from the sidewalk. He painted them from hotel balconies, looking down at the street from a third or fourth floor vantage point. They are zenithal, or top-down, views of the bustling crowds and carriages.
Yeah, I have to push back on this a little bit, because when I first read the source material, this felt deeply counterintuitive to me.
Okay, how so?
Well, the protocol claims this helps with navigating crowds. But if I am trying to walk down a packed, chaotic sidewalk in Manhattan, or navigate the London Underground during rush hour, how does looking at a painting from the perspective of someone standing on a balcony high above the street actually help me? I mean, I'm not floating above the crowd. I am down in the thick of it, just trying not to get elbowed in the face.
That skepticism is totally warranted because your conscious mind is focused on immediate obstacle avoidance. You're looking at the shoulders of the person directly in front of you. But Conexa is targeting a completely different layer of neurological processing.
Okay, lay it on me.
Let's look at the neuroscience of spatial navigation. When you are down in the crowd, reacting only to the immediate obstacles, you are heavily utilizing your sympathetic nervous system. You are in a state of mild, continuous alarm, stopping, starting, dodging. It is highly inefficient and metabolically very expensive.
It's exhausting. You get to the end of the block and you feel like you've run a mental marathon.
Exactly. Now, consider the top-down perspective of the Pissarro painting. When you observe a crowd from above, you stop seeing individual obstacles and you begin to see fluid dynamics.
Like a river.
Yes. You see the collective current of the people moving down the sidewalk, the eddies forming around a stopped carriage, the pathways of least resistance. Processing this macro-level visual information activates a region of your brain called the parietal cortex.
The parietal cortex.
Yeah.
What is its specific function in this context?
The parietal cortex is the brain's master mapmaker. It integrates visual information with proprioception, which is your sense of where your limbs are, to construct a complex, real-time map of your body's position in relation to the broader physical environment.
Oh, wow.
So when Kinexa exposes a patient to Pizarro's zenithal views, they are actively stimulating the parietal cortex. They're training the brain to analyze spatial patterns and anticipate trajectories rather than just reacting to proximity.
Okay, so it's effectively upgrading the spatial prediction software.
Exactly. The training happens in the abstract, viewing the painting from above. But when that patient leaves the clinic and steps back down onto the crowded sidewalk, their primed parietal cortex begins to unconsciously apply that top-down predictive model to the ground-level experience.
That makes so much sense.
They stop reacting to the person immediately in front of them, and they start anticipating the flow of the crowd 20 feet ahead. They inscribe their own movement into the collective current.
It's like playing a racing video game where you are stuck in first-person view, and suddenly you get the overhead minimap in the corner of the screen.
That's a great way to put it.
You still have to drive the car, but you can anticipate the corners long before you get to them. Your movement becomes vastly more economical. You aren't wasting energy hitting the brakes every 5 seconds. And Kinexa is able to map the efficiency of this movement.
Yes, absolutely. In a dynamic setting, the Kinexa AI cartographs the individual's motor flux. It tracks the fluidity of their gait, the frequency of their hesitations, the microaccelerations and decelerations. They can clinically quantify how well a person's brain is processing the spatial geometry of a crowded environment.
That's incredible.
But, crucially, the nervous system cannot sustain that level of complex spatial processing indefinitely. The protocol recognizes that the brain requires a counterbalance. This is why the dense, complex cityscapes are immediately followed by absolute visual silence.
The snowscapes.
Yes.
The protocol transitions away from the crowds and focuses on Impressionist paintings of deep winter. Vast, quiet expanses of white fields, muted gray skies, bare trees. The source documents describe snow as a neuronal noise reducer.
To understand why snow is neurological medicine, we really have to define what noise is to the brain. In a modern urban environment, visual noise is the relentless bombardment of high-contrast colors, flashing digital signs, fast-moving vehicles, complex architectural geometries.
It's just nonstop.
Every single one of those visual inputs hits your retina and demands processing power. Your brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for executive function, decision-making, focus, it has to work overtime to actively suppress and filter out the 99% of that information that is irrelevant to your immediate survival.
The prefrontal cortex acts as like the bouncer at the club, constantly shoving away useless data so you can just focus on walking to the grocery store.
And that act of suppression requires massive amounts of glucose and metabolic energy. It leads to a state called directed attention fatigue. When you introduce a visual environment like a snowscape, you are radically altering the incoming data stream.
Because it's all just white and gray.
Right. A snowscape is fundamentally monochromatic. It has incredibly low contrast. The edges of objects are softened by the snow cover.
This low bandwidth image.
Exactly. Suddenly, the visual cortex has very little complex geometry to process. Because the incoming data is so simple and non-threatening, the prefrontal cortex no longer has to exert energy filtering out noise. The bouncer gets to go on a break. The metabolic demand on the brain plummets. By utilizing these low-contrast, minimalist paintings, Kinexa induces a state of profound neuronal calm. And the AI can measure this physiological relief in real time.
Wait, how do they measure the relief?
Through the dilation of the pupils and the stabilization of the respiratory rate, you are not just enjoying a pretty winter scene, you are actively downregulating the electrical activity of your central nervous system.
That is a phenomenal transition. I mean, we have essentially mapped the entire diagnostic software of human perception. We booted up the visual cortex, calibrated our balance against gravity, aligned our spinal posture with vertical architecture, engaged our parietal cortex to navigate complex space, and then cleared the cache by engaging the visual silence.
The brain is fully calibrated.
The body knows exactly where it is in physical space. But human life requires more than just perception. Eventually, we have to do work. We have to exert physical force. This brings us to the next massive evolution in the Kinexa protocol, phase 2, l'immédiacy du geste. the biomechanics of effort.
If the first phase was about sensory input, this phase is entirely about mechanical output. How does the human machine manage physical load? To explore this, Conexa centers their analysis on one of the most viscerally striking paintings of the 19th century.
Oh, I love this one. Gustave Caillebott's Les Raboteurs de Parquet.
Universally known as the floor scrapers.
Right, and for the listener who hasn't seen this piece, it is not a delicate painting of a garden. It depicts three working-class men, stripped to the waist, down on their hands and knees in a Parisian apartment. They are using sharp iron tools to violently scrape the old varnish off a hardwood floor.
The light is hitting their sweat-slicked backs. You can practically feel the tension in their muscles.
The Conexa documents refer to this painting as the aesthetic of muscle and tension.
Because from a clinical and biomechanical perspective, the floor scrapers is a masterclass in the anatomy of the posterior kinetic chain.
What exactly is the kinetic chain?
The kinetic chain is the concept that your body is not a collection of isolated muscles, but a continuous interconnected system of fascial tissue and muscle fibers that transfer force from the ground up. When we analyze the men in this painting, we are looking at the exact architectural blueprint of maximal controlled physical effort.
Break down the anatomy of what they're doing. Why is this specific posture so critical to Conexa's AI mapping?
Well, look at the man on the right side of the canvas. To push that iron scraper into the hardwood, he isn't just using his arm.
Right, he's using his whole body.
Exactly. The fourth generation begins at his planted toe, travels up tension in his hamstrings and glutes, and moves into deep lumbar flexion, which is the controlled bending of the lower spine.
Okay.
The force then transfers across his core, up through his rhomboids, and into the scapular extension of his shoulder blade as he pushes his arm forward. Every single joint angle is perfectly optimized to transfer weight from his center of gravity down through his hands without breaking the structural integrity of his spine.
And they have to breathe, right?
Yes. To maintain that intense muscular contraction, he has to synchronize his respiratory diaphragm with the effort exhaling forcefully on the push.
It is absolute geometry.
Yeah.
Because if he rounds his lower back just 2 degrees too far, or if his shoulder blade loses its stabilization against his rib cage, the kinetic chain breaks, the force leaks out, and he blows out a disc in his spine.
Precisely. It is a visual representation of perfect symmetrical effort. Conexa utilizes this aesthetic ideal to map the reality of their patients.
So how does the AI track a patient doing this?
When Conexa places a patient under a physical load, like asking them to lift a weight or perform a repetitive reaching task, the AI tracks their center of gravity in relation to their base of support. Human bodies are inherently lazy,
Tell me about it.
They will always seek the path of least neuromuscular resistance. If a patient has a weakness in their left hip stabilizer, their body won't just stop lifting the box. Instead, the brain will instantly subconsciously recruit secondary muscles to compensate.
Oh, like cheating the movement.
Exactly. The patient will slightly rotate their lumbar spine, or they will hitch their right shoulder up toward their ear to cheat the movement.
And while that compensation might help you lift the box today, doing it 1,000 times is what leads to chronic tendinitis, joint degradation, and severe injury.
The Conexa AI is designed to catch those microcompensations before they become catastrophic injuries. It measures the symmetry of muscular activation and the technical precision of the gesture under load. It compares the patient's actual movement to the optimal geometric ideals represented in paintings like the floor scrapers.
That is so cool. And to deepen this analysis, the source material introduces a fascinating contrast because they place Caillebott's perfectly symmetrical floor scrapers next to Edgar Degas's paintings of Parisian washerwomen.
Right. And the washerwomen paintings are very different. These are women carrying massive, heavy wicker baskets full of wet laundry, but they are carrying them pinned against one hip.
Which introduces the biomechanical challenge of the asymmetrical load.
Exactly. When you carry a heavy weight on one side of your body, your center of gravity is violently pulled off its central axis. To prevent you from falling over laterally, the musculature on the opposite side of your body has to engage in massive isometric contractions.
So it's pulling you the other way to keep you upright.
Right. If the basket is on the right hip, the left quadratus lumborum deep in the lower back, the left obliques, and the left upper trapezius must fire intensely to keep the spine relatively straight.
You're fighting a war against torque.
Exactly. The body adapts to the asymmetrical constraint, but Conexa uses this to ask a clinical question. At what metabolic and structural cost does this adaptation occur?
The AI monitors how rapidly the stabilizing muscles fatigue.
Yes. They also utilize Jean-Francois Millet's famous painting of the sower, a farmer striding across a field, throwing seeds from a bag. That painting is an exploration of torso rotation and segmental coordination. As his right arm throws the seed forward, his left leg strides out. It activates the crossed muscular chains, transferring force diagonally across the body, from the right shoulder down through the core to the left hip.
It is astounding how much raw, clinical, biomechanical data is encoded in a 150-year-old oil painting if you just have the framework to look for it. It's all just physics and anatomy rendered in pigment.
It really is.
So we've mapped how the body handles heavy, acute effort. But what happens when effort becomes repetitive? The protocol moves into an area defined as neuroagility in the collective body. And it introduces a term I find endlessly fascinating, myelination.
Myelination is the fundamental biological process of skill acquisition. Whenever you perform a novel physical movement, whether that is swinging a golf club, typing on a new keyboard, learning a dance step, your brain fires an electrical signal down a specific pathway of neurons to command your muscles. Initially, that signal is slow and clumsy.
Because it's a dirt road, the brain hasn't paved it yet.
That is an excellent analogy. But if you perform that exact same movement repeatedly, and crucially, if you guide that repetition with clear, focused intention, the brain recognizes that this specific neural pathway is important.
So what happens then?
Well, specialized cells called oligodendrocytes begin to wrap the axon of those neurons in a fatty, insulating substance called myelin.
It's literally like wrapping an exposed copper wire in rubber insulation.
Precisely. The myelin sheath prevents the electrical action potential from leaking out into surrounding tissue, and it allows the signal to jump rapidly down the nerve fiber through a process called saltatory conduction. The more you repeat the gesture, the thicker the myelin sheath becomes. The signal travels exponentially faster, and the movement shifts from being a clumsy, conscious effort to a fluid, automatic, and highly energy-efficient reflex. Thousands of repetitions myelinate the circuit.
So Kinexa is tracking the fluidity of movement to determine the level of myelination. But the source material takes this concept of fluid movement and applies it to a group setting.
Right, using Renoir.
Yes, Pierre-Auguste Renoir's incredibly famous painting, Le Bal du Moulin de la Galette, is this joyous, vibrant scene of dozens of working-class Parisians dancing and drinking at an outdoor cafe in the sunlight. How does a painting at a Sunday afternoon party relate to the clinical tracking of neuromotor learning?
It introduces a profound neurological concept, mirror neurons, and the efficiency of collective movement. Human beings are profoundly social animals, down to our cellular biology. Deep within our premotor cortex and our inferior parietal lobule, we have specialized cells called mirror neurons. These neurons are unique because they fire an action potential, not only when you perform a specific physical action, but also when you observe someone else performing that exact same action.
So if I watch you pick up a cup of coffee, the neurons in my brain associated with picking up a cup of coffee light up, even though my hands are empty.
Yes.
My brain is essentially running a background simulation of your movement.
Exactly. Now, scale that up to the Renoir painting. When you watch a large group of people moving together in a synchronized, rhythmic, and fluid way like a crowd dancing to a shared waltz, your mirror neurons are firing in massive synchronized waves. Your brain is simulating that fluid collective harmony.
That's incredible.
Evolutionary biology rewards this shared rhythm. When we perceive ourselves moving in sync with a group, or even just observe a group in sync, the brain optimizes the release of dopamine and oxytocin.
It chemically rewards us for being part of the tribe.
Exactly, but it's also about energy efficiency. When you move in synchronization with the collective flow of a crowd, it requires drastically less cognitive processing and physical energy than moving randomly or moving against the flow. Renoir painted the biological joy of optimized, myelinated collective movement.
But the protocol immediately juxtaposes that joy with a very different type of modern reality. They contrast Renoir's dancing crowd with Claude Monet's La Gare Saint-Lazare, which is a painting of the massive glass and iron train station in Paris.
The contrast is jarring, and intentionally so. The train station painting is filled with billowing steam, massive black iron locomotives, harsh angles, and the implied deafening roar of industrial machinery. It represents the dawn of pure, unrelenting sensory overload.
It's the 19th century equivalent of walking through Times Square or, navigating a massive airport terminal during a delay.
And Kinexa uses this to highlight a critical vulnerability in our biology. The human nervous system, with its delicate mirror neurons and its need for spatial certainty, was simply not designed by evolution to process the speed, the mechanical noise, and the visual chaos of the technological world.
We just can't handle it.
No. In an environment like the Gare Saint-Lazare, the brain cannot find a synchronized rhythm to latch onto. Instead, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, is constantly stimulated by the unpredictable movements and loud noises. The body is forced into a state of chronic sympathetic arousal.
And the AI maps this.
The Conexa AI measures how heavily this modern sensory tax degrades a patient's motor fluidity. They quantify how quickly a person's movement becomes rigid and defensive when exposed to this type of chaos.
Which perfectly sets up the next concept.
Yep.
And I have to say, of everything in this massive stack of research, this is the idea that has most fundamentally changed how I view my own daily life.
The body in architecture.
Yes, the protocol moves into a section called the body and architecture,
Right.
and they utilize Cabot's painting, Le Pont de l'Europe.
This is perhaps Dr. Delong's most brilliant observational synthesis. The Pont de l'Europe depicts a well-dressed man walking his dog across a massive, newly constructed bridge in Paris. The dominant features of the painting are the immense, rigid, crisscrossing iron trusses of the bridge itself. The architecture completely dwarfs the human figures.
Here is why this blew my mind. I think most people, myself included, walk through a city with a very distinct sense of separation. I am a soft, biological organism made of flesh and bone, and the city around me is just an inert backdrop made of concrete, glass, and steel.
Like it's just scenery.
Right, the buildings are just scenery. But Conexa argues that the city is not passive. It acts as an active, dominating urban exoskeleton that literally dictates the geometry of our bodies.
Think about the physics of a modern urban environment. A city is composed almost entirely of rigid, unyielding lines of force. You have the sheer vertical drops of skyscrapers, the strict horizontal grids of the streets, the heavy iron diagonals of a bridge truss, the narrow parallel walls of a hallway.
They are everywhere.
These are massive, dominating geometric structures. When a human body moves through these spaces, our central nervous system subconsciously detects these rigid lines of force. Because we are highly adaptive creatures, our bodies instinctively attempt to align with the dominant structural reality of our environment.
We mimic the architecture.
We do. The rigidity of the environment actively suppresses our natural, fluid, organic movements, and it forces a specific structural alignment on our skeletal system.
Wow.
If you are walking down a wide-open beach, your gait is loose, your arms swing freely, your shoulders rotate. But if you take that exact same body and force it to walk down a long, narrow, artificially lit corporate hallway, your posture instantly changes.
You tighten up.
Your elbows tuck in, your stride shortens, your cervical spine stiffens to match the rigid verticality of the walls. The architecture is actively commanding your axial alignment.
I want you, the listener, to do a posture check right now. Think about the room you're in. Are you sitting in a rigid chair looking at a rectangular screen bordered by straight walls? Notice how your spine has molded itself to fit the angles of the furniture and the room. The city is forcing a posture onto you, usually a compressed, defensive one.
And Conexa's AI captures this phenomenon in real time. They analyze what they call a patient's conscious urban walking. They measure how well a person maintains the integrity of their axial alignment, the elongation of their spine, the openness of their thoracic cavity to allow for full diaphragmatic breathing when they are subjected to the compressive, rigid forces of a simulated architectural exoskeleton.
The goal is to train the patient to move through the city with structural autonomy, rather than just subconsciously collapsing into the shapes the buildings dictate. That is a profound realization. We are constantly negotiating with the concrete around us. So let's take a breath and review where we are in the protocol. We have pushed the human machine to its limits. It has exerted maximum muscular force scraping floors, navigated the fluid dynamics of crowds, mapped new neural highways of movement, suffered the sensory assault of the train station, and fought to maintain its posture against the heavy iron exoskeleton of the city.
The sympathetic nervous system has been firing on all cylinders.
The battery is critically low. Now, if we want to actually retain any of the strength or agility we've just built, the Conexa protocol demands a radical shift. We enter phase 3, la régénération et le silence, recovery and neuroplasticity.
The transition from active effort to deep recovery is, without question, the most biologically critical phase of any optimization or rehabilitation protocol. It is a fundamental law of physiology. You do not get stronger while you are lifting the weight.
Right, you get stronger resting.
Yes. The lifting merely provides the stimulus, the micro tears, and the muscle fiber. You only get stronger during the period of rest that follows, when the body synthesizes new proteins to repair and overcompensate for the damage.
And how do they trigger this rest?
To initiate this massive physiological downshift, the protocol utilizes perhaps the most universally recognized Impressionist works in existence, Claude Monet's Nymphaeus, the water lilies.
If you have ever had the privilege of seeing the massive water lily canvases installed at the Musée de l'Orangerie in Paris, it is a staggering experience.
Yeah.
These are not normal paintings. They're gigantic, panoramic, curved canvases that completely wrap around the walls of oval rooms.
It's an immersive environment.
Totally.
Yeah.
When you stand in the center, there is no horizon sign. There is no sky. There is no perspective drawing your eye to a vanishing point. You are entirely submerged in a flat plane of reflective water, floating lily pads, and soft, blooming flowers. And the Conexa documents introduce a specific psychological term for this experience: soft fascination. What is the mechanism behind that?
To understand soft fascination, we must contrast it with the state the brain was in during the previous phase. When you were navigating the train station or the crowded street, your brain was engaged in directed attention.
Directed attention.
Yes. Directed attention is a top-down, highly demanding cognitive state where your prefrontal cortex forces your eyes to actively scan the environment for specific information, looking for a train schedule, avoiding a moving carriage. It requires immense metabolic effort to sustain, and it leads directly to the attentional fatigue we discussed earlier.
Your brain is tightly gripping the steering wheel.
Exactly. Soft fascination is the deliberate release of that grip. The massive scale and the intentional artistic blur of Monet's water lilies present an environment that is visually rich, but completely devoid of threats or required tasks. There is nothing to decode.
Right.
There is no central focal point demanding your concentration. Your gaze is allowed to simply wander, to drift aimlessly across the soft patches of color. Because the image requires absolutely zero cognitive effort to process, the prefrontal cortex relinquishes its control. The accumulated attentional tension of the day rapidly dissipates. Conexa's AI actually measures the drop in attentional tone by tracking the slowing of your eye movements and the relaxation of the micromuscles around your brow and jaw.
And there is a very specific, deeply biological reason they use the water lilies for this. Beyond just the blur, it has to do with the dominant color palette. The expert insight section of the source material focuses heavily on the concept of green chromotherapy.
This is where art and evolutionary neurology perfectly intersect. Green chromotherapy is not just a new age concept. It is a measurable biological intervention. The specific wavelengths of light that correspond to the colors of nature, the lush greens and cool blues of Monet's pond, act as the ultimate safety signal for the human nervous system.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a moment. When we say green is a safety signal, is that actually a hardwired biological reality, or is it just cultural conditioning? Do we just feel relaxed looking at green because society tells us that nature is peaceful and we associate green with go on a traffic light? Is there a physical receptor in the body that cares about the color green?
That is a vital distinction to make, and the answer lies deep in our evolutionary past, far predating traffic lights. For millions of years of hominid evolution, our ancestors' survival depended on their ability to visually scan the landscape for resources.
Right.
A visual field dominated by brown and yellow meant drought, desert, and starvation. But a visual field dominated by vibrant green meant one thing: the presence of liquid water. Where there is water, there is plant life, there's shade, and there are prey animals. Green literally equated to survival and safety.
So our visual cortex evolved to prioritize that specific wavelength as a trigger for relief.
Precisely. When photons carrying the specific wavelengths of green light hit the photoreceptor cells in your retina, the signal doesn't just go to the visual cortex to be identified as a color. It also travels down a separate neural pathway directly to the hypothalamus, which is the region of the brain that controls your autonomic nervous system and your hormone production.
Okay, so it goes straight to the control center.
Yes. When the hypothalamus receives the green signal, it recognizes that the organism is in a resource-rich, safe environment. It immediately sends a chemical command to your adrenal glands to drastically downregulate the production of cortisol, your primary stress hormone.
The brain literally says, "We found the oasis, you can stop panicking now."
Yes. The reduction in cortisol leads to a cascade of physiological shifts. Your heart rate variability stabilizes, your blood pressure drops, and the deep fascial tension in your skeletal muscles begins to unwind. It is chromotherapy healing through exposure to specific colors, but it is grounded entirely in measurable evolutionary endocrinology.
That is incredible. Looking at a painting of a green pond chemically alters the hormones in your bloodstream, so the body is beginning to stand down. But to truly recover, the mind has to disconnect from the external world entirely. This brings us to day 13 of the protocol, and a concept they call cognitive disconnection and the DMN. To illustrate this, Conexa uses Edouard Manet's brilliant, complex painting, Un bar aux folies bergères.
This painting is a masterpiece of psychological isolation within a crowd. It depicts a young barmaid standing behind a marble counter. Behind her is a massive mirror, which reflects the environment she's looking at. A wildly crowded, brightly lit, chaotic Parisian nightclub.
There's so much going on in that reflection.
There are hundreds of people drinking, socializing, and there are even the green legs of a trapeze artist performing high up in the top left corner of the reflection. It is the definition of sensory overload.
But the barmaid herself, the subject of the painting, is not participating in the chaos. She is standing perfectly still, resting her hands on the bar, and she has this incredibly specific expression on her face. It is a vacant, empty gaze. She's looking straight out of the canvas, but it feels like she is looking 1,000 miles right through you. She is physically present in the loud club, but mentally she is completely checked out.
That empty gaze is exactly what Conexa is studying. The protocol links that specific facial expression and cognitive state directly to the activation of the default mode network, or the DMN.
I have an analogy for the DMN that helped me understand it. Tell me if I am accurately mapping the neurology here. I think of the DMN as the brain's background defragmentation process.
Good, I like that.
If you remember older computers with spinning hard drives, over time, as you saved and deleted files, the data would get scattered and disorganized, making the computer run slowly. To fix it, you had to run a disk defragmenter. But the defragmenter program could only run when you weren't actively using the computer. If you started moving the mouse or opening a web browser, the defragmentation would immediately pause. It required the main system to be idle so it could work in the background, reorganizing the files, archiving memories, and cleaning up the operating system.
That is a highly accurate mechanical analogy. The default mode network is a vast, interconnected network of brain regions, including the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex, that becomes highly active only when your brain is not focused on the external outside world. It is the network responsible for daydreaming, mind-wandering, deep introspection, and thinking about the past or the future.
It is the internal operating system.
Exactly. And just like your computer analogy, it operates on an inverse relationship with your external attention networks. You cannot be intensely focused on a spreadsheet or navigating a crowded street and have your DMN fully active at the same time. The brain toggles between the two.
Right.
However, the DMN is absolutely essential for mental recovery. It is the neurological process where the brain consolidates short-term experiences into long-term memories, processes complex emotional events, and integrates new motor skills. If you never allow your DMN to run, your cognitive hard drive becomes fragmented, leading to severe anxiety, memory deficits, and burnout.
Which brings us back to the barmaid in Manet's painting. She has managed to run her defragmentation process while standing in the middle of a screaming nightclub.
She has. She has found an internal sanctuary amidst the noise. She has activated her DMN despite the overwhelming external sensory stimulation. And Conexa believes this is a highly trainable clinical skill.
Trainable? How?
Using their AI, they track a patient's ocular micromovements and their autonomic markers to quantify their ability to consciously disengage their external attention and enter the DMN. They are measuring a person's capacity to maintain an internal center of gravity, a profound cognitive stillness, even when the environment is saturated with demands.
It's not just about finding a perfectly quiet, dark room to meditate in. It's about building the neurological resilience to access that quiet room inside your own head while you are standing on a packed, noisy subway car. That is essentially a modern superpower.
It really is.
Okay, we are entering the final stages of the protocol. We have survived the day, we have calmed the mind, and now we must prepare for the night. The final phase focuses on the evening ritual and muscular abandonment. How do we definitively signal to the biological machine that the day is over?
To map this transition, the protocol turns to the quiet, intimate work of Edgar Degas, specifically a pastel drawing titled Femme se coiffant, which depicts a woman sitting alone, slowly and methodically combing her long hair. The clinical focus here is on the neurobiology of soft, rhythmic repetition.
When I look at that image, it evokes a very specific, almost heavy feeling of winding down. It reminds me of the instinctual behaviors you see in animals, like a cat meticulously grooming its fur before curling up to sleep.
That instinctual connection is exactly right. The protocol refers to these as haptic gestures, gestures involving touch and proprioception. When you engage in slow, circular, repetitive tactile actions like brushing your hair, slowly washing your face, or gently rubbing your temples, you are sending a massive, unambiguous signal directly to your central nervous system.
What is the specific mechanism there? How does rubbing my temples tell my brain to go to sleep?
Your skin is densely packed with specialized sensory nerve fibers called C-tactile afferents. These fibers respond optimally to slow, gentle stroking movements. When you perform these repetitive grooming gestures, the C-tactile afferents send a signal up your spinal cord and directly into the insular cortex of your brain.
The insular cortex.
Yes, which is an area deeply involved in emotional regulation and homeostasis. The insular cortex processes this slow, rhythmic touch as a definitive signal of safety and comfort. It immediately sends commands to downregulate the sympathetic ganglia, turning off the fight-or-flight adrenaline response, and upregulate the vagus nerve, forcing the body into a profound parasympathetic shift.
The rest and digest mode taking over the system.
Exactly. You have to actively, manually transition your nervous system. You cannot expect a body that has been fighting gravity, filtering noise, and managing stress all day to simply snap into deep sleep the moment you lie down.
It's like trying to put a car in reverse while it's still doing 60 miles an hour down the highway. You'll strip the gears.
Precisely. There has to be a deceleration phase. These slow, repetitive, haptic gestures are the biological brakes. Connexa's AI actually analyzes this deceleration, mapping the subtle decrease in global muscle tone across the patient's body as they engage in these evening rituals.
Which perfectly delivers us to the ultimate destination of the entire 15-day protocol, the final stage. Renoir's breathtaking painting, Le Sommeil, which is a portrait of a woman lost in deep, heavy slumber. And the core takeaway that the Conexa documents hammer home here is something that fundamentally challenges how modern culture views rest. Sleep is not the absence of activity.
No, it is not.
Sleep is not just turning the biological machine off. Sleep is an intensely active, highly demanding neurological act.
It is the crescendo of the entire protocol. Everything we have discussed, the visual calibration, the spatial navigation, the biomechanics of effort, the activation of the DMN was all merely preparation for this exact state. Conexa refers to this ultimate metric as total muscular release or muscular abandonment.
Define muscular abandonment. How is that different from just lying on the couch?
When you lie on the couch watching television, your muscles might feel relaxed, but your nervous system is still maintaining a baseline level of resting tension, known as muscular tone, to keep your joints stable and prepare for sudden movement. Total muscular abandonment only occurs during the deepest phases of slow-wave sleep. It is the complete systemic cessation of motor neuron firing. Your skeletal muscles become entirely flaccid.
There's a paralytic state.
Yes, and it is only when the body achieves this absolute zero tension state that the brain diverts its massive energy resources away from maintaining posture and external vigilance and redirects them inward.
To fix things.
Exactly. This is the critical window where true neuroplasticity occurs. During this phase of deep sleep, the brain actively, physically rebuilds the neural pathways you stressed during the day. It thickens the myelin sheaths we discussed earlier. It flushes metabolic waste products like amyloid beta out of the brain tissue. It repairs the micro tears in the posterior kinetic chain.
So to bring it all full circle, you break the muscle down and stress the nervous system during the day, but you only actually secure the upgrades. You only build the armor while you are paralyzed in deep sleep.
Precisely. If you do not achieve this profound depth of recovery, the effort of the day is largely squandered. You wake up with a lingering deficit, and the degradation of the system begins to compound. Conexa's final, ultimate AI metric is measuring the performance of a patient's recovery. They are quantifying exactly how completely the nervous system is willing to let go of its defensive tension and abandon itself to sleep.
It is a breathtakingly comprehensive view of human biology. Let's pull back and synthesize the sheer ambition of what Dr. Christophe Delong and Conexa Formation have constructed here. They've taken the subjective, emotional, unquantifiable beauty of Impressionist art paintings that millions of people stare at every year just because they are pretty, and they have utilized advanced artificial intelligence to translate that beauty into an objective, mathematically precise blueprint for human biomechanical optimization.
They have essentially proven that these 19th century painters were, in fact, highly intuitive neurologists.
Wild to think about.
Monet, Pissarro, Caillebotte, they didn't have functional MRI machines or computer vision algorithms, but they possessed a profound instinctual understanding of how light, geometry, and color impact the human central nervous system. Conexa has simply provided the 21st century mathematics to validate their 19th century intuition. From the exact luminous gradients required to gently boot up our midbrain in the morning, to the structural biomechanics of how our fascial tissue transfers force, all the way to the specific rhythmic touch required to manually force our vagus nerve into a parasympathetic state at night. It is a complete holistic mapping of the human biological operating system.
It truly is. And for you, the listener, there is a wealth of actionable data you can extract from this deep dive and apply to your body today. You do not need access to the Conexa AI Clinic to start hacking your nervous system. You can implement the 20-20-20 rule this afternoon, break your visual lock on your screen, look at a distant vertical structure to disengage your ciliary muscles, and feel the tension physically drop out of your upper trapezius.
You can become acutely aware of the urban exoskeleton. The next time you walk down a narrow hallway or past a rigid skyscraper, catch yourself. Notice how the architecture is commanding your spine to compress, and consciously choose to elongate your axial alignment and breathe into your full thoracic capacity.
And tonight, before you get into bed, you can utilize those slow, repetitive haptic gestures. Take 5 minutes to slowly brush your hair or massage your jawline. Consciously activate those C-tactile afferents to send a massive safety signal to your insular cortex, putting the brakes on your sympathetic nervous system so you can actually achieve the muscular abandonment required to rebuild your brain. You have the power to control your visual and tactile inputs. But before we close out this session, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to turn over in your mind. We have just spent an hour dissecting how a specific group of French painters in the 1870s intuitively understood the exact visual frequencies and geometries required to hack the human midbrain, lower cortisol, and stabilize the spine. Their artistic intuition was effectively a highly advanced form of pre-technological biohacking.
They painted the medicine long before we had the tools to measure the cure.
Which raises an incredible question. If they knew this, what else is hanging quietly on the walls of our museums? What other profound undiscovered medical, psychological, or biomechanical secrets are currently hiding in plain sight in the chaotic splatter of abstract expressionism or encoded in the perfect geometric proportions of Renaissance sculpture, just waiting for the right AI algorithm to come along and finally decode the data?
It is a thrilling prospect. It suggests that the art gallery as a clinical diagnostic space might just be opening its doors for the very first time.
It guarantees that you will never walk through a museum or look at a painting in exactly the same way ever again. That concludes our deep dive for today. Take care of your nervous system, pay close attention to the geometry of the world around you, and we will catch you next time.